I really want to start with an acknowledgement. I am on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I want to pay my deep respects, and I want to recognise the resilience, the courage and the pride of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
My name's Helena Ronfort. I'm a lived experience researcher, and I'm on the lands of the Quandamooka people.
Hi, I'm Matt Ball. I'm a nurse practitioner and therapist at the Humane Clinic, and I'm coming from the lands of the Kaurna people in the Adelaide Plains region.
I'm Richard Newton. I'm a professor of psychiatry at Monash University and a consultant psychiatrist in a youth mental health service in Victoria, but I am currently sitting on Whadjuk land of the Noongar peoples in Perth.
Thank you. And I'm Claire Conlon. I'm the National Manager of Advocacy Research and Policy at Wellways, and I pay my debt respects to all the lands that you're all coming from today as well. I really want to thank you so much for being amazing contributors to our Woodcock lecture last Thursday night. And I guess I would like to start with if there were any sort of reflections, any further reflections that you might have had from our time together last Thursday night, or any reflections that you've heard from other people.
One thing I noticed more than anything was about my own behaviour and about the exhaustion of speaking in public from our hearts or our experiences, however we want to describe that, and then the silence after the lecture and the conversation, because we all go off in our own ways. And I suppose I was thinking about that in relation to what it's like accessing mental health services, because I wondered how different it was to go to an appointment or a session or a meeting and then go away and be on your own with what you've said. And so, it sounds a bit indulgent, but I was just thinking of it in those terms. I've heard some nice feedback from people, some valuable feedback, and I'm also curious about those that have not necessarily fed back and were uncomfortable or frustrated, agitated, angry, and how we can include all the different voices in the conversation.
I had a real mix of emotions after the event. Like it was great to be able to connect with people. I really enjoyed being with the audience and spending time with people afterwards. There was a moment where somebody who I had participated in the research came and spoke to me, and that was really touching. There was the moment that I spoke to you about, Claire, where the flight attendant on the plane on the way home actually stopped me and said that they were at the lecture and found the lecture really valuable. And that was it was nice to see the reach outside of mental health and to have that experience. So that was nourishing. I think there was a moment where I thought, that we do have these times of interjecting within systems, within the way that, the status quo and the way that things are. And there was a little bit of me that went afterwards, oh, is it really going to make a difference? And with that came like a little bit of a sense of despondency, emptiness, really hopeful that things can be disruptive enough to change, but also knowing that change happens so very slowly and really wanting to see people's hearts and attitudes move towards doing things differently, but knowing that maybe that's not going to happen, and having to be content with the way things are. And what I really appreciate about this opportunity is to keep the conversation going. And how can we keep the conversation towards doing things differently going so that there's more impetus? I think that we don't have a collective we about making change at the moment. So it's really up to us individually, like what are we going to do as individuals and who's going to resonate with us and what we say enough to come along for the ride and make similar changes with us.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have, of course, done no reflection of the meeting, although I have I suppose. But one of the things I would like to contribute to this flow of the discussion would be that a number of people have said to me things like how brave it was for me to attend, and how that there was some risky element for me to be there. And I think that's a bit sad, that we are one of the reasons that I think that our mental health service system is in such a poor state is because we do so rarely join together with the things that we all share and speak with one voice. And when we all speak with one voice about things that matter to us all, like the quality of care that people can expect to receive, and the helpfulness of that support. When we speak with one voice about those things, we are very powerful. And there was something about the conversations, both before the Woodcock, but certainly afterwards, that just emphasised to me how broken into smaller and less strong bits we are.
Many of us are working within the system. And so how, working within the system, do we move to a more compassion-informed model in the current system that we're working in? And so there were some little kind of people that asked that sort of question in different ways around how can we shift the power from a more sort of biomedical dominant model to create a more compassion-informed model at scale, and really bring this thinking to front and centre for people who are working. And what barriers are there to upscaling approaches like just listening? So they're big questions.
Can I kick off with just a reflection about the false dichotomy that is, I think, in that question?
Yeah.
Which is that the suggestion that the medical model is not a compassionate model, and the mental health service system that is, around illness, is not full of compassion, because that's how I first read that question. Of course, then I read it differently and saw it as a different for what it was, which was about different models. But compassion is something that I and my clinical colleagues, it's why we're there. And so there's there's the question about compassion-informed models, but there is also this question that I think is critically important around any model, that if it's there for long enough and generalized, and so this is about if you scale up and generalize and you move from a very engaged, committed, passionate, motivated service to a whole load of services that are doing it day in, day out, and people get exposed to so much distress that people and have to make decisions and do things within those systems that are morally injurious. People do step away from some of their connectedness. It is a system issue, and so there's a big question here about any of the models of care, and I think that we need many models of care for a system to be really good.
Yeah.
But all of them will have a similar issue, which is how do you support people in their engaged, compassionate care of people over a long period of time of sustained work. And there are, and that's one of the things that I took away from Matt's presentation, was that actually, that commitment to a really strong support system underpinning the people that were doing work in the system that we do not have in the general mental health service system. People working in ED, they go in shift after shift after shift after shift, sometimes after the, going to work after some of the most catastrophic experiences, really. And the next day there they are again doing, with very little heed to their self-care by the system. And so there's a big question here about how does the system support people by recognizing the importance of that emotionally connected, compassionate kind of care.
I guess I feel surprised and joyous that you brought that up, Richard, and because just listening will look dispassionate once it's been around for 20 years, and not because of the intentions of the origins. And I don't know how we remain vigilant to continual change rather than just plonking one model in place to make it all better, which was probably a better way to explain my rather crude statement that the reform won't work. I still think that, but I think that it's much more complex than that, and complicated. I want to say, Claire, you used made reference to compassion-informed model. Well, Dr. Beck Wheatley, a GP in special interest in psychiatry that is one of the doctors at the Urgent Mental Health Care Centre in Adelaide, was the first person that got us talking about that. So she is a medical doctor and she has a lived experience and she is a human being.
Yeah.
And so, I really resonate. And then how do we also acknowledge that despite the professions, the disciplines, the roles coming from compassionate, activist, passionate places also get corrupted? And I think this is not about saying there's one individual or one group that have intentionally done that. But I suppose for me, it's ideologies that get out of hand, and we're very good at pointing at religious groups or nation groups or other groups that have religious or nation ideologies that cause harm, and we forget that any one of us might be a member of a group that can get so attached to our ideologies that we lose sight of what was at the heart of a compassionate position. And I'm going to name it. In my lifetime, Islam has been pilloried through the terrorist movement of Al Qaeda the language in our media has been abominable. And yet my Muslim friends talk of such incredible compassion and love of Allah and the Islamic knowledge. And so that's just one example where, what's all our responsibilities in that? So I'm not sure I have the answer as such to anything, but I wonder how we acknowledge that any one of us can be part of the next movement that will lose compassion as an ideology rather than a practical application.
There's so much in both of what you have said. One of the things in that question is that we talk about the mental health system as if it's one unified system, and I think we have clinical services that are based on the medical model, and that's what people expect when they go to clinical services. They expect to have services that are underpinned by looking at pharmaceutical treatments, and that can be done compassionately, but I think the organising principles beneath that are not necessarily based on compassion. They're based on the idea that we need to medicalise distress, or that we need to have stigma attached to people's experiences, and that we need to treat people as if they're different. And I think that ties into what you're saying, Matt, about we have this tendency in society to other people, and once we other them, whether it's like Islam that you talked about, or the Jews, or anything, whoever we other, then we have permission to treat them differently. And so long as we've got these processes in place within society that enable us to other people, and we other people in mental health, and we other people because we want to have some distance. And medicalising distress has a tendency to distance ourselves from people who are in distress. It doesn't have the hoped for result of reducing stigma. It actually creates distance. between people so that we can other them and treat them differently. I think that that we have to look at, you know, how we're delivering services, and services that are providing community mental health should not be run on a medical model. You know, we have this opportunity of providing services in the community, and they should not have, you know, clinical or medical underpinnings. This is the opportunity to provide social care and provide support to people to really engage and be connected in the community. And if we see everything under mental health, then I think we're going to sort of be continuing to sanction the idea that we can provide, you know, biopsychosocial care, which is really another way of saying bio care, because we don't really have an understanding of how to incorporate social perspectives within biological models.
I think the fact that the question is around how do we move to a more compassion-informed model has been a person's experience. And I think a little bit sort of unpacking some of that question too was around, for a number of people with lived experience, their experience was around meds and beds. That when they were particularly in an altered state, what was on offer was meds and beds. And not really a dive, if you like, into all the sort of social aspects of that experience. You know, also feeling very, very comfortable sort of being quite task focused, but not so, that this is, again, were people's experiences, but not so comfortable in the just listening kind of face, if you like, sort of sitting and exploring and just being and all of those kinds of things. So I mean, I think at the heart of all models, I hope we never lose compassion. And whatever sort of model, you know, and you know, Matt, you talked about the mental and the physical, and that it's actually about our health. And so viewing our health in that kind of a way is, again, a little bit of that sort of othering, you know, around mental and physical, but actually it is about our health. And that was something that really kind of I took home.
Could I just add, Claire, I think when people have an expectation sometimes that when they're going to a service for their distress, that they will get therapy, they will get talk therapy at least, they will get access to a social worker, they'll get access to a psychologist. I think the expectations around what's on offer, as opposed to the reality of what's available, is quite jarring for people. I think, you know, we do need to provide more compassionate care, whether we do that as clinicians and we're alongside people and we listen and we're with them, or whether there's access to something beyond meds and beds, which there absolutely should be. But behind it all should be that capacity to be able to be alongside somebody and listen and believe and trust in their experience.
Just the meds and beds thing, because of course we don't have many beds. It's one of so it's again the dichotomy there is it's not quite my lived experience of providing clinical care. That in fact there's this enormous moral dilemma around what people want and need and what can be provided, and most medications, as everybody in this panel I think is aware, have moderate, on a good day, moderate helpfulness. Being in a bed-based service is largely a brief time out whilst people hopefully get some support in working through their crisis in order to regroup, re-establish hope and autonomy for themselves outside of the ward. You know, that's about. So the meds and beds thing, you do need meds and beds, but it's as part of a broad, comprehensive approach. And you know, my language around this, when I think about all of the different elements that I needed, I think about it in terms of stepped care. But in fact, stepped care isn't the right idea either, because the implication is that you're going up a flight of stairs to higher and higher levels of intensity or something like that. Whereas in fact, you just need a mosaic of different elements that will suit different people. And, you know, a lot of the questions, I'm just going to want to dive into this thing, because a number of the questions that were submitted were around how can we stop people getting diagnoses for their distress? And the reason I want to dive into it is because it seems to me strongly connected to this question about othering. And I don't know whether it's other people's experience on this panel, but what I am seeing more and more now, and DSM-5 has been, you know, I despair really at the end of my career, and I do feel like DSM-5 or DSM-6 is going to be it for me. But DSM-5, I think, is so unfit for purpose, and what it is leading to is enormous numbers of people seeking and receiving. And I think I put the emphasis on seeking because that's what some people seek. The problem with DSM-5, of course, is that we all tick boxes in DSM-5, usually for multiple diagnoses. And so there really is a problem with our classification and that approach to diagnosis. I do absolutely think that at somewhere along the spectrum, there are a series of illnesses that really require very careful, clinically informed approaches that include medication and formal types of therapy. You know, that is my lived experience, if you like, and that's what the science tells us. But it doesn't tell us where that point is anymore. And what we're seeing now, I think, and I wonder if people could comment on this. I would love you to join me in this conversation. Actually, I worry that one of the things about so many people receiving diagnoses, you know, ASD, ADHD, all of the neurodivergent, you know, like this, all of those spectrum disorders, actually we're all on those spectrums. And so many people now are receiving diagnoses that lead often to meds that are really not helpful, inappropriate, but also does this thing of identifying more and more of the population as having some kind of mental health problem. And although the kind of increased diagnosis on one hand might be seen as a way of accepting the enormous diversity of human experience and providing people with some understanding of where they sit within that diversity, on the other, it's narrowing and narrowing and narrowing the definition of what normal is and excluding more and more people. And when we start doing that, the society is not going in a good way, history tells us. Anyway, so that's one of my big thoughts.
Thank you.
I'm happy to join you in this.
Matt,
there's so much, isn't there? It just expands and expands. And there's a few things that I was thinking when you were talking. And I say this, Richard, before the talk in Melbourne, no one else will have seen this, but Richard came up to me and introduced himself. We introduced ourselves to one another. And he said, you know, I might say things up there. Will you respond? You know, there was an invitation to respond. And that just reminded me just then, what happens if we can have fundamental disagreements or even just different views of the same thing and try and remove the power from that, the dichotomy of power from that? So I'll say this, Richard, in the spirit of us, you know, having a robust conversation, right? I can never understand, and it is mostly psychiatrists because that's the core the diagnostic model is a core component, right, of training in psychiatry. So that's why it's mostly psychiatrists, and that's not a criticism. When I hear quite a few psychiatrists in the model era saying, you know, most of the DSM's nonsense. Alan Francis, the editor-in-chief of the DSM-4 text, he's a great example. Most of it's nonsense, but there are these certain things that are acute illnesses for which we're treating. And my point isn't to question that. That's not my view, and I'm happy to share my view on that. But my point is, when I hear you say that, something happens in me that's uncomfortable, and then I want to attack you, right? Yeah. And that creates the dichotomy, and that then starts the power tussle. So today I want to say, Richard, and Helena and Claire, I don't understand that, Richard. But that's my experience, and yours is yours, and you possibly don't understand my experience of that. How can I sit here and say, this is a question you can answer anyone? I would say then, so my experience of the DSM is that it's fundamentally been tried and tried and tried into its 6th or 7th iteration with the text revised versions, and it's failed to tell us that there is a clear way to distinguish mental illness as a pathophysiological construct similar to any other medical conditions that we actually can give a reasonable pathophysiology to. We failed to do that.
I agree.
I'm convinced that, right, so I'm convinced of that, and therefore the medications that were given with a view to correcting what has been hypothesized and failed to be demonstrated to be true, and this isn't a criticism of you, this is just my view, it's implausible to say then there might be one or two that are and need those drugs, right? But if we just get stuck in that argument, we don't help the person in distress. So how do we have these arguments and discussions? Notice all the sensations in our body when we get into these conversations, all the vibrancy, all the intensity. How will I feel after this conversation? Do I need to text Richard and say, I hope it didn't offend you? You know, what do you think, Helena? You know, like all these things. How do we tolerate all this and show that's the beauty of human relationship? If we can stay enough in relationship, and that's not about a system, that's about people really, really intentionally working towards being in relationship, even when it's gross and vulgar and hard. And how do we keep the power structures out of that? And that's a long response, but that's kind of what I'm feeling. So I just want to be really honest, because I don't know any of the answers to any of the questions anyone's asking. How could I? And that's kind of the point, right? But each person that's asked a question really, 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 really wants to know what people think about that, so they can feel connected, so they can feel unisolated, not alone. Well, I don't know the answer, and I can cry with you, and I can offer you olanzapine, because some people find that really bloody helpful when they're overwhelmed. And if using a diagnosis is useful to you, I can use a diagnosis with you. I don't believe in it, but I'm happy for you to. But are you aware of the construct of history and power that's behind the diagnosis? And have you thought about that? Has that been useful to pick apart and go, oh, I don't believe it either, but it's really useful right now. And then in 3 years' time, I want to discard that diagnosis because I've done some more reading. It's not useful. And so, yeah, I'm being really dramatic because I feel passionate, you know, I feel. And then I want to say one of the things I think we miss out of this, and it's not, again, not a criticism, but we've got a political structure governing human interaction. And that's from the top all the way trickled down, whichever department of politics, whether that's politics in psychiatry and nursing, politics in lived experience, politics in government, world geopolitics. You know, we've decided we need some way to control this unalienable world of being human. And we've boiled it down to this kind of weird mental health world. Mental health is a made up construct. We're one being. Right, and I'll stop in a sec, and I want to give an example, and I don't want to offend anyone, but I want to give an example. The evidence-based guidelines for ADHD that are published have no evidence to support the diagnostic process. It says that in the guidelines. It's weird. And then autism, or autistic spectrum disorder, which has become this thing that's become so common, and I would argue some people find very valuable, is another made up idea like dissociotic, like schizophrenia, like all these things, observations where people have had thoughts and had the ability to formulate an idea and put it out there, and we've grabbed onto it. We have a minister for autism in South Australia. And I really, really want to be careful because I'm not intending to upset or offend anyone. But having a minister for autism is like having a minister for schizophrenia, right? And given that it's politically allowed to say schizophrenia does not exist as we've described it. People are distressed, they have voices and visions and alternative states. There's a plethora of arguments about why. How have we got to having a minister for autism, which is based on the same premise, a set of ideas about why some people behave in this way? That's political. And I presume the reason we've got a minister for autism in South Australia, and I hope it helps people, I really, really, really do. But I presume the reason we've got it is because it became a political potato that the South Australian government went, right, there's loads of families and people arguing for this. This is a noise we can't control. Let's have a minister for autism. Rather than any sense of science to it, because otherwise you need a minister for depression, because 1 in 4 people have that. You need a minister for anxiety because 1 in 4 people have that, you know, and you can go on. So there's also this weird, and I don't want to blame the Minister for Health in South Australia. I'm not wanting to get at him. I'm saying I presume he came to this conclusion because this was the kind of political hot potato and excitement of the time. That governs our system. So I'll just summarize that. Let's go back to small individualized response to individuals. We don't need big NGOs. We don't need big health services. We don't need political sound bites. We need to kind of work out whether the money we've got to deliver these services is possible in Christie's Beach at the Just Listening community, or in Helena's Town, or Richardstown, or Clare's Town on an individual bespoke basis. Would that be cost effective? Sorry.
Oh, I feel like I need to breathe after.
Sorry.
And I think that, you know, this is not about upsetting or offending anyone, or, you know, it's actually about having adult conversations and actually questioning what is going on. Because what we know is what we currently have is not working. So
I really like the words you used about being gross and vulgar. I think that's kind of hit the nail on the head for me. And I think these conversations are just that, conversations. And I feel uncomfortable with the idea that we're supposed to have answers or have some sort of expert knowledge around this. I felt uncomfortable around referring to diagnoses as having some scientific basis, because I know that that's not true. And, you know, as far as them being some that are legitimate, I don't have expertise to make a comment on that, but I do think the science behind it is incredibly fuzzy. And if we look at medication does work for some people, but we don't really know. We don't have a specific mechanism for why it works. I'm not a doctor, but I know that much to be true. And I think that they can be helpful for people. And one of the things that we talk about symptoms and the fact that, you know, the number of diagnoses is increasing, and it makes me think of the quote, and I'm not going to remember it exactly, but it's not healthy to be well adjusted to a dysfunctional society. And I think if we look at the fact that our society is dysfunctional and stop, you know, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic and just start looking at what's actually wrong. Like, why are we having these symptoms, which may not be symptoms of mental illness, but they might be symptoms of a society or a community that is disconnected and not functioning in a way that is working for people.
So Richard, would you like to make any further comment before I'm going to move the conversation on from diagnoses, I think, but was there anything that you would like to?
So I would just like to finish with, I completely agreed, not marginally, but completely agreed with 95, 96 maybe % of everything that Matt said and what Helena said. If we focus, you know, obviously the stuff that we disagree about needs to be talked about and allowed in a conversation. But if we are to get change, And if we are to use the structural power that is around us all, then we need to join with that 95%.
Yeah.
In my opinion, and celebrate that despite all of the apparent differences, the agreement is much more than the difference.
Yeah.
I think the bigger issues is much more than the difference too. Like we can squabble about these things, but the bigger issues of what's impacting people is what we need to be joining around, not the fact that, you know, we're disagreeing on certain points and vying for credibility. I think while we're all trying to be seen as being credible, and I think psychiatry has had its battles with being credible, lived experience. Practitioners or workers have had their battle with being credible. If we just allow each other to have, you know, different opinions, I think we would go a long way.
Yeah, and one of those things I think is the courage then for me is to, you know, I think I said this at the Woodcock lecture, is I don't, feeling bad about what I did yesterday is a small part of the process. Choosing how I want to move forward tomorrow is more important. And I think that's the same sort of thing, right? Like, because but the importance of that for me is that when we talk about systemic change and we forget the things that we share or the things that we're still grappling with, systemic change lands on the shoulders of the time clock of the oppressed, right? Systemic change is too slow. So one thing we can do day in, day out is have the courage to go into our workplaces and have small or big conversations and then return to, and I know that's ideological, but then return to the fact that the good stuff needs to happen today, not when the commission has reported. And one of the things that struck me in Melbourne was someone said to me, you shouldn't have said what you said about the Royal Commission, the reforms not working, because there was the department in the room. And I'll take that for what it was. It was a comment, but I just thought, oh, I don't imagine the people in the department are doing it to cause any problems. So on a day-to-day basis, how do we stay with that? Oh, yeah.
So I think it's probably a nice segue then into some of the next sort of lines of questionings around the lived experience roles and the infiltration of, if you like, for want of a better word, of lived experience roles into the mental health system. I know you talked about this, Helena, and that, you know, a big thing around the Royal Commission in Victoria was around amplifying the voices. But when we talk about power and having a seat at the table, or we actually create our own table and have our own seats, I guess there was a question around what does the panel think of the huge policy shift towards lived experience. So I know probably how this is going to go, but I really am interested in your, you know, in your views around that. When we do talk about, and you talked, you know, Matt, I think you said the system change lands on the time clock of the oppressed, and you know, that was a really interesting comment. So I guess I'm interested in your views around this huge policy shift, whether it's actually being felt in practice. But yeah, I'm just interested in your views.
Ultimately, I think my voice will take up power from a different position, and probably we ought to invite deep reflection and space for the lived experience workforce to decide whether the policy shift is meeting the ideologies and intentions of the lived experience workforce. Does that make sense? I don't want to sit on the fence here, but I want to say, I'm a nurse, I'm a psychotherapist. What space am I taking up by speaking on the policy shift of the lived experience workforce, other than I will say I support it in its intentions? I worry about whether it's going to meet what the intentions of the lived experience workforce were. But I can't speak to that. How can I speak to that? Ask me about nursing. I'll tell you.
Okay.
I hand over.
Helena?
Well, I guess I think the risks is that the seat at the table won't happen, that people won't be in positions where they're being seen as having, again, something credible to offer, something of value, that they're believed, that they're seen as equal. I think we're a long way from that. I think if change was able to be centred around lived experience and driven by people with lived experience and what they see the needs as being, as far as the changes that need to happen, and also, you know, being part of the solution. But I don't see that happening. I see that there's definitely involvement and consultation, but at the end of the day, who's making those decisions? And it does bother me. I think there's still, you know, discriminatory attitudes and a lack of confidence and low expectations for people with lived experience. And unless we change that, and unless we see that, you know, experiential knowledge is just as valid and just as useful in driving changes as expertise and knowledge that comes from learning, like, or sometimes they're melded together. But I think we really need to uphold the idea that people's experience needs to be seen as front and center. And I still don't think we're sitting around the table having these conversations where we're saying, you know, we're sorry that the system did this to you. We're sorry, and we want to hear your experience, and we acknowledge that you experienced trauma at the hands of the system, and we want to do things differently. I think there's a whole lot of reasons, you know, around what's stopping that from happening. But I think we need to hear the trauma and before we can move forward.
Richard, would you like to add anything?
There's so many things I would like to talk about in this space, but this is not my voice. But what I would say is over the last 20 years, one of the things that has happened in the services that I've been the clinical director of is that we've managed to reduce seclusion restraint down to zero in one of them for a prolonged period now, although that happened after I stepped away from the leadership role. But that change came about working, and I would say that the power to enact that change came from the lived experience voices, you know, ensure working as a catalyst for that change. And this began many years before this policy shift, if you like. And another thought I would have is that actually the formal learning has not led to a mental health and well-being service system that works. There's an opportunity for other people to step onto that platform and do that work. And so one of the questions was about how can allies support this? And I think one of the ways that we can that allies can help is by recognizing and addressing, you know, and I talk the deeply structural power issues that are built into the system that are discriminatory and need to be overted and fought against in order to create a safe space. Or in order to not create, but to ensure that the safe is space. The space is safe. Apologies for the spoonerism.
I think at the moment it's feeling a little bit broadly sort of tokenistic that we have a seat at the table, but we feel that our microphones are often off. So we've got to that point. But I know from a lived experience point of view, people are looking at creating their own tables and inviting people to their own tables, I think.
Yeah. Claire, can I say, I wonder what the diversity of lived experience might look like. if we, and I don't mean the diversity of the individuals per se, I mean the diversity of lived experience roles. It does seem to me that the lived experience roles have to fit the roles that are recognisable to the current system.
Yeah.
That feels like perhaps an area we could play with a bit. So I'm not wanting to promote this is the answer. I'm just giving an example. I have a lived experience of being incarcerated in hospitals, drugged up, all those things. It's been pretty horrendous. And I've developed a theory to explain psychosis through another context, which generally people in our clinic find quite useful. Now, I don't want to work as a peer worker, but that's a lived experience voice offering something into the system. How does that get in when the policy is about bringing in lived experience workers, but that voice doesn't necessarily come into that construct unless one of the people in that system can pick it up and bring it into their role? Now, I'm not upset about that. I'm just raising that because that's one example. The other thing is I mentioned to someone today in our clinic about whether they knew about the peer work role that was, and they just didn't know about peer work. Now, it's utopian and idealistic, but his voice is really, really important. He's been in the system for 10 years and he doesn't even know there's a peer work role within systems. And so then if we return to the last conversation and say, we're all coming to this with compassion and goodness at the heart, wherever that gets lost, and what do we share in common? It reminded me when Helena was talking, is the voice of lived experience, as well as systemic and policy driven, what's the question to be, what stops us when we're in the moment with an individual, whatever role we're in, stopping and trying to create space for that person to tell us what we're offering, whether it's useful or not? And I know that's idealistic, and I know lots of people try and do that. We try and get, consumer informed feedback as we go, but could we pay more attention to that? And that's not in the policy of the reforms. But that to me, I want to know from the person that I'm sitting with, if I'm in that moment not hearing them, I need to change my behaviour and work out how I can hear that better. I don't know the answers to that, but that seems a more kind and compassionate space to come from, that I might be getting it wrong this afternoon. And I don't want to do that. I want to make sure the person in front of me is broadly getting from me what they've asked for. How do I make sure that happens in the moment? Because that would feel pretty nice to hear their voice.
Compassion feels like, on a systemic level, if we're not looking at people's social determinants, if we're not being compassionate about what people's experiences are, and I know I'm bringing this back to that broader social and systemic stuff, but if we're not listening to, issues around housing or unemployment or, what people's fears are and what their needs are, olanzapine's not going to help with that. Being able to listen isn't enough either. Having compassion is to be active and doing something that's really active about making things easier for people in a society and where these things are really hard. It's really a struggle to be able to feel like your life is connected and meaningful and that you've got what you need. So I just think compassion is more than just that individual work. It's much bigger.
Absolutely. Richard, did you want to say something?
So I've just been to the Psychiatry College Congress. I know, I'm sorry, but actually it was really good. But one of the presentations there was about the response to COVID. And the most impactful, the most overtly demonstrated impacts on the mental health and well-being of the community was making sure that people didn't lose their houses and had enough money to keep above the poverty line. All of the mental health kind of system responses were marginal, if at all. The things that made a difference was given people enough money to eat and look after and clothe their kids and have somewhere to live in terms of their happiness and well-being.
Which was one of the questions that came in around those social determinants. And if people don't have a roof over their heads, if they don't have food on the table, you know, that is obviously going to impact, you know, they might come in and we might have a fabulous conversation, and but if they're going back out and where they don't have a roof over their head or food on their table, those systemic issues remain. And that there was a question around for many people that distress is around poverty and racism and intergenerational trauma. And really it's sort of like, well, how do we kind of work at the individual level, but also then I guess the systems level around all of these other kinds of things that absolutely impact on our health. And, you know, our postcode shouldn't be the biggest predictor of our health. Where we live, where we come from, where socioeconomically, and that is the biggest predictor.
What the colour of your skin is as well.
And the colour, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's a big question that also came through. I don't know if you've got any comments about that, but
I keep hearing in my mind, and it's probably idealistic and not possible, but I keep hearing what's happening about if we do this, and I really agree with your point, Helena, that it's much broader compassion. But if we can affect what we can affect, someone asked me last week, who would you turn to if you were in crisis? And they were wanting a certain answer, and I won't tell you what they wanted, but they were wanting a certain answer, and I had to think for a long time. And someone in Adelaide asked me, and I thought for a long time. Well, now I felt really vulnerable when I had that big passionate rant about 20 minutes ago. I could feel the anxiety in my chest. I was breathing differently, and now I feel a lot calmer. Oh, maybe I'd be more likely to approach one of you three, because you've seen me and you didn't do anything weird to me or shut me up or try and stop me. And so there's something coming up for me about lots of this feels like it needs to be at a very local level. But of course, that doesn't cut through the particularly racism. That doesn't cut through racism. Again, I think we can all take a role in that much more simply than try and change the system. And maybe the system will change. So maybe we need to, and I know it's just grassroots based stuff. I get that. That's all I'm really saying. But on an individual level, we all choose whether to be racist. Every one of us chooses whether to manage our own prejudice and decide which way to act. And this seems to be coming up. How do we all take a little bit more responsibility and feel a bit more freedom?
I think because it's hard and people are scared, but I do think you're right. Like, systems are comprised of individuals as well, and you know the relationships between individuals. And if we work on those relationships and lessen the spaces between people so that we can feel more connected and take action where we can and reach out and be that person who isn't going to judge or act in a way that is going to not meet, like to frighten somebody who's in distress. Like if we're able to do that and hold a space of welcome and acceptance and value for people, things would be different. I think it's hard to do that on a wider scale. And I think that question about crisis is important because I think as services, we've offloaded crisis to big uncaring systems. Or we've offloaded crisis to services like Lifeline. We haven't integrated the ability to care for people in crisis within our everyday support networks and services. If we're going to have mental health services in the community, then they need to integrate support for people in crisis. It shouldn't be, oh no, we can do this, but if you're in crisis and we determine it by this arbitrary line, if you're in crisis and we feel that you're at risk, whatever that risk means, then you have to, go to emergency departments or clinical services. We need to have different conversations about risk and how we determine risk, because risk exists in society. It's part of being human. It's part of being alive. There's risks in the way that we respond. If we do support or enact somebody going to services against their will, that's a risk that we need to accept as part of our service delivery as well. Like, there's risks everywhere, and we need to have shared conversations about those risks, not feel like we can assess risk on behalf of somebody else.
Hey, you know, when you were speaking then, I was thinking, what would it be like? You know how the post office in Australia is broadly going out of business because the capitalist market has decided it can do it cheaper, and we're holding on to this antiquated system, which I quite like, by the way, the post office, but we're holding on to it as if it should exist forever, because it always has. It just got me thinking. One of my thoughts some time ago, and I realised it's not likely to happen, was why do we not have mental supports available in the library, in the post office, in the betting shop, in the pub, which is a bit like returning to community, which wasn't ideal, I know, but why are we, and I'm going to say this, why are we setting up these new mental health and wellbeing locals in buildings that in the end will look a lot like mental health services, and not diversifying that out into the places where the supports are? I was walking through Melbourne when we were doing the talk, and outside the State Library there was someone in quite a lot of distress. Now, I know it's not possible all the time, but why would we not provide mental health supports on the corner of busy junctions? Because that's where people are.
Yeah.
And we might catch them early if we want to do early intervention. And another thing I was thinking, and I hesitate to mention this because she's sponsored by a drug company now, but I look at someone like Pink, the singer, and I think about risk. And she sings, dances, and slides down a wire from the top of a stadium. She's fallen off a couple of times doing it, and she still does it, right? Before she decided to get sponsored by Pfizer for the vaccines, I would have said, why not get Pink to have a look at the mental health system and give us a bit of an overview of the risks she would take? Or someone else, insert anyone else you want in Pink, but someone from another sphere of the world who does manage those or face those risks you're talking about, Helena, and go, God, you know what? You guys are trying to mitigate risk. You can't. This is what I thought I'd try. So what would it be like to stick someone like that there?
I always wanted to go back to something you said right at the beginning, Matt, about having conversations together, because I don't think we do that very well as different disciplines, as different services, as different levels of mental health service delivery. I don't think we have conversations together well. And as you were talking, it reminded me, and I know this is contentious, but, you know, as part of having care and community, we've developed headspaces. And headspaces aren't delivering on the outcomes that they were designed to deliver on. And they're also placing people within these narratives of medicalising or exclusionary practices, because either they fit or they don't fit this headspace model. And I just wonder, you know, how we can do things differently. And I think the only way is to have conversations together and to be able to work on something, because otherwise we're going to go off and think we have the latest, best idea, and with all good intentions, start rolling out hundreds of them within our communities and then not have the results that we hoped for.
I mean, I think we absolutely operate in a risk-averse system. And I think Matt, you talked about, you know, well, if we want to manage risk, we'll actually listen for longer. And, you know, whilst we had, I mean, you talked before also, Richard, about seclusion and restraint, and it will be eliminated in Victoria within 10 years, which is probably too long, but we're also having conversations now around the use of compulsory treatment. And actually the risk there is that the fear of actually accessing any service can really deter people from seeking engagement with our system altogether because of the fear of compulsory treatment. and that people are choosing not to engage with services. So if we talk about sort of risks and things like that, whilst we've kind of got those things in place at a system level, the risks are actually much greater.
Can I say something about compulsory treatment and reviewing
Yes.
that?
Yes.
And the contradiction in terms of removing control and restraint in 10 years and rejigging compulsory treatment. Others can disagree with me, but compulsory treatment is restraint.
It is. Agree.
Right. So if we're removing control and restraint, why do we have compulsory treatment? I had this debate about 6 years ago in Adelaide and was kicked off a research team for suggesting that we shouldn't just research injections in emergency departments as part of control and restraint. We should investigate depot medication as control and restraint. Same drug, different form, same outcome, different experience of the outcome. So so sometimes I think we get into talking in language, and I know Professor Gurin's work would talk about language being part of the problem here. We have to talk in language that's acceptable within the social network and context of which we're using it. But CTOs remove people's rights to freedom to do what they want. That's restraint and control.
Absolutely.
And look, this is a brave thing for me to say, actually, in terms of my license and registration. I don't believe the Mental Health Act should exist because it's unjust. Now, I'm not saying tomorrow get rid of the Mental Health Act and don't care about people, but it is unjust. There's so few checks and balances. I don't know any other legal process which is so whimsical to remove people's citizenship rights as the Mental Health Act. I don't want to aim that at individuals. I'm just saying that if you reflect on it, how can we have the Mental Health Act as we've got it at the moment? And so when these things exist, it makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
I feel anxious saying this as a nurse because it's like heresy as a clinical professional to say this. And yet I just think, my God, have we not moved beyond heresy as a problem? And we haven't. I don't know what anyone else thinks of that. Maybe you don't want to comment, but you don't have to. I don't mind what people think. I'm curious.
It holds enormous power. It holds enormous power. Did anyone else want to provide comment about what we've just heard?
I agree that I think that any sort of coercive treatment is an infringement on people's rights, on their human rights, and I think that we need to really look seriously at doing something differently and radically different. My fear is that we're investing so much in reforms, and we need to invest in something different. We can't just take away the Mental Health Act and leave people with nothing. We need to create something different. We like the DSM has a lot of power. It has a lot of influence. It it enables things like the Mental Health Act to exist. We need to create something different. We can't keep holding on to the way that we've done things, and unless we're prepared to not just criticize, but to actually look at doing something different. I have so much respect for Matt's ability to create something different. I think we need to have other ways of creating something different for people so that there legitimately is choice for people when they're in distress. And I think saying that we don't believe in the DSM, but I do believe in suffering, and I think that people are suffering and they need support. They're wanting support. And how do we create ways of giving support to people in the community that is sustainable and humane and nourishing, and that people don't feel like they don't fit or they can't get support when they need it. And I would love to see that as being something that everyone can come on board with without it feeling like, just people who are on the edge are working towards this. I would love allies to get on board. I would love us to have like a movement. I think if we look at the idea of the mental health system as a complex system, I think there's so much like that's trying to maintain the status quo. We really need a mass to be able to create something different.
And I think the consumer movement has actually got us to this point.
I think the consumer movement has. My fear around lived experience being so entrenched within the system is that it will lose that political clout that it holds. So I think we need to also see potential for people to work and outside of the system to be able to create change. I think creating change in the system is incredibly hard. I'm not saying that it can't be done, but I think it's hard. So we need to look outside the system as well.
I'm really curious to know what Richard thinks about what I said about that. Maybe he doesn't want to comment, but I'm curious. Only but before I just want to say, Richard, Helena, when you said we can't just remove things, we have to have alternatives. I wholeheartedly agree, and I'm not saying you weren't saying that about me, but the problem with that, as I see it, is that that's what stops us changing. I'm saying let's scrap the Mental Health Act and be 100% committed to being responsive to what we're going to do when we do that. So tomorrow we cancel the Mental Health Act, and then every single one of us, and it's ideological, but comes to it with a, oh my God, we've got to work this out today. We've got to start working again with a fresh. And I know we can do it as a society, whatever your position, because we did it with COVID. We shut the bloody world down and responded. Now, whether you agree with vaccinations, RAT tests, whatever, that we managed to do a response.
And if you get rid of seclusion rooms, people won't use them. So I think we will come up with different alternative ways of responding. But while it's there, I think you're right. While something's there and while it's familiar and there's a well-trodden path to that, then we'll keep using it. People were up in arms about not using plastic bags, but we've moved on really quickly. So I think once you take something away, people find alternatives.
And we didn't mind the RAT tests, which are now sitting in the ground. Billions and billions and billions of them. Sorry.
Richard.
Matt, or indeed Helena, I'm not sure if you're aware, but I am a member of the panel that is reviewing the legislative criteria for the Mental Health Act. And so it would be deeply compromising of the process of that panel for me to express my opinion here, I'm afraid. And I hope, and Matt, I want to acknowledge the emotion and power and distress that was underpinning some of where you just were, and hope that you will accept what I've just said, that I have lots of thoughts about this, but I don't think I can share them.
Thanks, Richard. I mean, I appreciate you just saying that, because now I know where you are, right? That's what we're all talking about here. Let's know where each other is. So yeah, thank you. Thanks.
But what I can say from a Wellways perspective, we're certainly putting forward that we want to see the elimination of compulsory treatment and assessment.
Can I ask I can't express an opinion. I can ask a question.
Yes.
Could I ask a question about, so, it was the injustice of the Mental Health Act, I think, is what you were talking about. One of the things you were talking about. Have you got any thoughts about what you would replace the Mental Health Act with? Would you do fusion laws, for example? Whereas you have a Health Act where if people don't have decision-making capacity for a particular decision, that there is a process, regardless of how you lost that decision-making capacity within health, to support you in making decisions. So, that would be a fusion law definition. I just wonder whether you just think any substitute decision making should be not allowed anywhere, or whether you have a view about what the alternatives to a Mental Health Act might be.
I think the capacity, and this happened when I was in England, the Capacity Act, the decision making capacity in the Capacity Act and the Mental Health Act got fused in England during the last review of the Mental Health Act. I think the one before last, when I was training as a nurse, and I see it in South Australian Mental Health Act. You have to lack decision-making capacity. And I think that's unfortunately well intended, as so much of what we do is. But actually it's served to muddy the waters. Because decision-making capacity, when you can demonstrate someone's neural pathways have gaps or deficiencies or whatever we talk about in dementia, so that we can kind of, as a society, all agree that to have dementia and to recognise the deterioration of the brain matter and how that informs your processes to think, to make decisions, I presume most people, I don't know, but I presume most people would be on board with that. To talk about decision-making capacity and mental illness, which is what the Mental Health Act is talking about, is an erroneous argument. Because even if I came to the party and said maybe some people have a mental disorder of 5%, right? I don't mean that cheekily, I mean genuinely, 95% can be judged under their mental capacity related to their decision making around their mental disorder and have their rights removed, and that I cannot support.
Yep.
Cannot support. What do I think is an alternative? I think the Mental Capacity Act, and you're right about the emotion I feel about this, Richard. I've been really surprised about how I feel about this. I'm glad. I'm all right with it. I feel all right about it, but I'm surprised at how overwhelmed emotionally I feel. But the Capacity Act does give us some ideas, I think. If you look at it from a human, relational and compassion way, the Mental Capacity Act and the Mental Health Act in South Australia says people need to be supported by whatever means to have capacity to make decisions. That's the compassion bit. Put people in safe spaces, they make choices. Some people will choose to go to hospital and even ask you to keep them there. If you give them the space, the environment, the context to make decisions. So that's the bit that I do support. I do think some people lack capacity because of changes in the brain, because of dementia and things like that. I don't think you can do it around mental illness because I don't think the science supports that. And therefore, I think let's use the Capacity Act to say, I'll spend 10 hours with you so that you can come in and out of capacity and make the best choices that you can make. And then I'll enact that. And you won't be 100%, I know that, but I think it'll be better than the 95% of non-disorders that get detained under the Mental Health Act. Maybe. Don't know what anyone, Elena, have you got a view on that? Or Richard, I know you can't comment, but too much. But
when others speak on your behalf, you lose. And it's deeply affirming and healing when you are supported to make a decision.
I don't have an alternative, and I'm sitting with some discomfort because I've used the Mental Health Act before. I've been on the Mental Health Act, and and it, at some level, appreciated being kept alive on the Mental Health Act. So it's a really uncomfortable conversation for me because of that, because it feels quite personal, and because the enactment of the act at some level for a lot of people is because of deep love and care and concern for others. So I think we need to find a way of capturing that love and care and concern and that space of compassion, that space of decision making, and be able to do something differently. I think things like the dual responding model and where people can have capacity to sit down with somebody and sit down with a peer worker or sit down with a social worker or a nurse and be able to talk things out and be given options and choice. I think we need to move to a joint assessment of risk, a joint decision making. We can't just say that it's okay anymore for somebody else to make that assessment. And I think that's the challenge. I wasn't given any information when I was on a Mental Health Act about what it was, or, and I was on one initially when I was 14. So I've been on them for a while. I've been on different ones. And I think it, And I think the other thing is that we need to really be serious about the impact of them and stop justifying their use based on the security or the need of clinicians. I think we really need to be aware of the impact and to be able to have those conversations with people. Otherwise, they're going to end up on more and more mental health acts because we haven't really sat down and supported people to be able to know why they're on it or how to get off them or how to do things differently. I just think the whole process needs to be different if we're going to be able to move forward and look at doing things differently.
Thanks for sharing that, Helena. That feels like I'm really grateful that you've brought up your experience and that can bring that into the conversation, because I think I know lots of people that have felt some value in staying alive through the Mental Health Act. Absolutely. And I wonder how we move to an advanced care directive based voluntary advanced decision making process around the Mental Health Act. I'm not saying it particularly feels comfortable for me, but I've thought about this lots. Why does the Advanced Care Directive get overridden by the Mental Health Act in South Australia? Why does the Advanced Care Directive not say, God, I'm so glad I'm alive and I got through that last experience. I can't imagine a time, but if it happens, I'd rather go into hospital than be dead. Right? And put that in your Advanced Care Directive. Because I think that and I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for us, but we place an awful lot of burden, as you say, of people that feel like they're trying to do the right thing using the Mental Health Act. We're asking clinicians to be scared witless. And I'm not asking for sorry about that. We put ourselves, I'm a nurse. If I make a decision, I've chosen to be a nurse, I get paid for it, I get it. And if I make a decision out of just being fearful that harms someone, that's not useful to either person. It's certainly harmful to the person, but it's not. So how do we get to a place where we don't need the skillful clinician to take the rights away? We've heard as best we can. I know there'll be certain circumstances where you can't, but how do we get towards an advanced care directive position type thing? I'll give you an example, and I know some people will find this challenging, and maybe we can edit it out if it feels too much. Working with a consultant psychiatrist, sat with him one day, person's coming to see him. She really doesn't want to be on a community treatment order. This was the second year of community treatment orders in the UK. Expected 400 community treatment orders, had 4,000, right? So it blew out. So we can see in the first and second year, the humanness doesn't work with the policy, right? Because it didn't work. Oh, shit, we've all lost ourselves and gone for this. And tragically, this beautiful guy who happened to be trained as a consultant psychiatrist decided to keep this person on an order, and he mulled it over for 2 hours. And the next day she ended her life. Oh, not that next day. She went from his office and went and ended her life. And I sat with that same consultant the next day in our team as a reflective practice and watched this human twisted, taking responsibility, but twisted by the decision he'd made that he felt was inhumane. And he'd got himself caught and done it. And that doesn't benefit anyone. So I'm not asking to feel sorry for clinicians, but I am saying the system doesn't work in terms of people making compassionate human decisions in that way. And then it oppresses other people. And that seems painful.
So painful.
Yeah.
There's something about the act itself, but then there's also something about how the act is enacted, I think. And I wanted to share a story because it reminded me of something you shared at the Woodcock Lecture about holding hands, Matt. And it's an example of this woman who I spoke to who had multiple involuntary admissions where the police were called out. And most of those times, the police handcuffed her and forced her into the police car and took her to hospital. And these were incredibly traumatic experiences. And then she talked about this one time when 2 police officers came into her house, sat at her kitchen table, and while she was crying, they held her hand and took her into the police car. It was the only time they hadn't used handcuffs. And I thought that is the Mental Health Act, but it's enacted differently. It's enacted with compassion. And I think there's no excuse for treating people inhumanely or without compassion at that time either. Like, if we're going to, while we still have the Mental Health Act, there's no excuse for not being able to do that with kindness and compassion, and not lock people up, not let so many stories of people not being able to use the bathroom and wetting themselves. Like, those kind of stories shouldn't be happening. It's just wrong. So I think we do need to do something differently, but while we've got this in place, can we at least be with people with kindness and compassion, and be like a human, just be like human, have a human response, and be another human with someone who's in distress.
And part of that then, for me, I said this to Richard after we'd spoken the other night on stage. I said, I'm not saying the priority is the clinician, the professional that makes that decision. However, they are part of the dynamic. So when I make a decision and it turns out to be judged by the coroner or any other environment that didn't have the desired outcome. So if we take suicide and someone ends their life and I didn't detain them, where do I get, hopefully we don't get to that, but where do I get the space where someone sits next to me in court and says, I just believe this person really thought this through, really reflected from their heart and their spirit, and you can find your findings, but I know this person came from their heart, because, and that's not just in that moment, that needs to be ongoing, right? So we need more time to make the decisions, we need more space in ourselves. But, I'll give you another story. Ended up in coroner's court 6 months after I qualified. I found someone who I cared deeply about dead. Ended up in coroner's as a new nurse. The healthcare trust forgot to send the legal team. There's lawyers, there's the public gallery, there's media, and I walk into this coronial as a brand new nurse, just going, what? Very sad about this young woman who died, who I cared a lot about, still do. And just as we were about to start coroners, the psychiatrist who I worked with walked in, and he said to me, Rupert White, he was called. He said to me, I can't speak because I haven't been called by the coroner, but I just came to sit with you to support you. That's where, that for me is the same compassion we've been talking about like the whole time.
Yeah.
So it mattered less than what the coroner said about me, because someone had chosen to say, I can see you. You did the right thing. You did your best. And that was beautiful. I'm so grateful to Rupert for that.
Such powerful stories.
I love the fact that you've named him. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and because I think that's part of the compassion, right? Is talking about the good stuff. That's the 95%, right?
So such powerful stories, and I really want to honour your time as well. It kind of feels like we're just sort of just finishing when we've kind of just really got started. These conversations, I think, more of these kinds of conversations are really needed. And I really want to thank you so much